There we go. All right, I think we are ready to roll. So I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Megan and Penny, for keeping things smoothly rolling. I'm Sarah Pratt. I'm at the International Institute of Minnesota. I teach a pronunciation class there, and I'm also in the master's program in TESOL at Hamlin. And here's my email if you should like to write to me after this. So today's presentation is kind of meta. I'm not going to be teaching you about L2 speech. I think you are all professionals in this field and you know about this. At one point in the slides, I will step back and address you. And at the end, I hope to have a conversation. We'll have a poll and I hope you'll chat in the chat. And then I hope we can also turn on mics and cameras and stuff. So if I'm not really talking about this, what am I talking about? I'm going to be talking about, I'm asking you for feedback on a workshop that I intend to deliver to entirely different audiences than you. I hope to present this workshop to audiences who have no linguistic training, no teacher training, and perhaps little experience interacting with people who do not speak English as their first language. Who would those audiences be? Church groups, volunteers, staff and residents in independent and assisted living. And I'm hoping that you can help me think about other places too. So I'll be using some terms today. I'll be using these kind of willy-nilly, but I do want to ask your advice later on how I should, where I should settle. I'll be using L1 user for native speaker with abbreviation NS. I'll be using L2 user for non-native speaker, abbreviation NNS. I'll be using L2 speech and accented speech. So yeah, well, okay, I guess I got into Zoom. Okay, so here we go. Let's begin. So this workshop will have two goals. And the first one is to train L1 users of English to be more effective listeners of L2 speech and speakers too, right? To truly train people who, as I said, have no linguistic training, no teacher training, and perhaps little experience speaking with people who don't speak English as their first language. How would I do this? I would introduce linguistic features in the speech of people who come from backgrounds that are very well represented in Minnesota. This has a very local focus. So Hmong speech, Hmong inflected speech, Spanish, Somali, Karen, and other language backgrounds. The other goal would be to help participants see and reduce implicit and explicit biases against the speech of L2 speakers. How would I do that? Well, I would familiarize the participants in the workshop with the types and the effects of those biases. So the core questions that this workshop would ask would be, what is accented speech? What does that mean? What is intelligibility? If accented speech poses a problem, what is the problem? And we can say that it's intelligibility. And what is that? Which linguistic features have been shown to affect intelligibility? What non-linguistic factors have been shown to affect intelligibility? How do judgments about accented speech impact non-native speakers? And then finally, what can native speakers do to help create smoother communication? So those are the guiding questions. And then here is sort of how I would go about it. I foresee different kinds of workshops, short ones, long ones, you know, maybe a 5-day thing at a church camp that I know of, or an hour or an hour and a half. So different directions I could go in, but this is the general gist of it. So that first question, what is accented speech? Everyone has an accent. right? You professionals know this. I don't think that's something that most people acknowledge or think about. So everyone has an accent, but we still need a definition of accented speech. So let's use this one. Accent is the degree to which how different a pattern of speech sounds from the dominant local variety. Okay, how different does it sound? That's the degree of accent. So accent is something that we grasp really quickly. We humans are so good at perceiving difference in speech, and research has shown that we can pick up accent in 30 milliseconds of speech. That's 3% of a second, right? There's 1,000 milliseconds. We can perceive an accent in speech that's played backwards. We can perceive accent in languages that we don't know. So we are just so sensitive to this. Now, again, if accent is a problem, what's the problem? Well, if the message doesn't get across. And so then we have to think about, what is intelligibility? Here's a definition: the extent to which the listener can identify the speaker's intended words. Okay, the extent to which the listener can identify the speaker's intended words. It's not the same as accent. This is an objective measurement, relatively speaking, and researchers typically measure this by having listeners transcribe the words they are hearing in L2 speech. So you can measure it, right? You can see if it's happening or not, but it's not the same as accentedness. It's not the same as accent. Accented speech can, as we all know, be highly intelligible. It's not the same as comprehensibility, although it is part of a broader notion of comprehensibility, which is a more subjective measurement of how difficult it is to understand speech. Okay, what causes intelligibility? What language features have been shown to affect intelligibility the most? It's complicated. Pronunciation. Okay, the everyday understanding of accent is, oh, there's something different about the pronunciation, about the sounds of the language. True, that is part of accent. Fluency. Again, in everyday understanding, fluency is, oh, how well do you speak a language? I'm fluent in French. She's fluent in Korean. But linguists think about fluency as pace and pausing. And both of these things contribute to perceptions of accent and to intelligibility. Then there are those factors beyond just the sounds. So intonation, stress. So the up and down and the leaning in on some syllables. These give rhythm and melody and emphasis to our speech and are connected to intelligibility. There's volume and there's voice quality. How is the instrument arranged, right? So some researchers recently are even thinking that voice quality is one of the most important factors. Then there's grammar, there's word choice. All of these things contribute to a notion of intelligibility, but researchers have not yet identified which single factor or even which group of factors most affect intelligibility. These are all part of it. Now, let's step back. I'm stepping out of the workshop. I'm stepping into my group of colleagues at the Summer Institute. And let's think about this from the perspective of our fields of ABE and applied linguistics and TESOL. You know that there's an ongoing debate in this field about these linguistic features. Which ones are the most important for comprehensibility, that broad subjective understanding of does the message get through? And it is so interesting to read, dozens of papers and to see how they don't agree, and to read about, is it segmentals, right? Is it the actual sounds inside a word? Is it vowels? If so, which ones? Is it consonants? Which ones? And if it's segmentals, what's the issue? Is it deletion, substitution, insertion? What's happening? But maybe it is suprasegmentals. Hi, I'm hearing a little kid. Hello. Maybe it's suprasegmentals. Maybe it is pitch. Maybe it's pitch range. Maybe it's voice quality, how the instrument is arranged. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's intonation. Maybe it's loudness. Maybe it's rhythm. Maybe it's pausing. Maybe it's speech rate. And we need to know, because we need to know what should we focus on when we can teach pronunciation. I have an amazing luxury in my present work where I teach nothing but pronunciation, and it's amazing. But I remember other jobs where I just had to slide that in here and there. And if we have such limited time, what should we look at? What should we focus on? As I said, the current state of the field, researchers disagree. And there was a conference in the 2010s at some point where intelligibility experts were brought on the stage to listen to a recording of non-native speech and explain precisely why that was unintelligible. It was already deemed unintelligible. They could not. They were up there on the stage, and then they reflected later, and among the things they said were, I was panicking, or I just switched off. They could not identify what the issues were that were keeping them from understanding what these two recordings were saying. So there is consensus, though. The experts don't agree, but there is a broad consensus, and that is segmentals are important, and so are suprasegmentals. So there is consensus that it's not just one thing or the other. And the recent research seems really interesting in that it's looking to quantify, right? Rather than just have people rate things that they hear, it's looking to quantify. So for example, there's research on functional load. That's the number of words with that particular sound, or how many pairs of words that particular sound would contrast, would distinguish. The more words in pairs, the higher the functional load. And people are looking at particular sounds or pairs of sounds to see, all right, these must be the most important ones. We can just dispense with these. And we know this as language teachers, right? We know that if someone is persistently saying, I think so, that's fine. It's not a problem, right? For all the focus on the interdental fricative, we don't really need to worry about it that much, right? It's perfectly intelligible. Acoustic phonetics is another interesting field because this is the study of speech production and perception. And there's a researcher at St. Cloud State, Etienne Kofi, who uses listener ratings and instrument measurings. And he measures the frequency and the intensity and the duration of sounds. And then he compares that with listener ratings to see, okay, quantifiably, why is something rated as unintelligible? And are the raters always consistent or correct? So that's kind of the background. Other questions that researchers are asking are really interesting too. Things like, what does this L2 speaker need to do with English? Or who is the listener? Is the listener also a non-native speaker? I mean, as you know, 1.5 billion people in the world speak English, but only about 360 million of them are native speakers. The majority of any conversation in the world right now in English is not between two native speakers. Is the listener a machine? Is the listener a machine that is assisting this person or assessing this person? And what does that mean? What's the listener's role? What's the listener's responsibility? How does the listener think about the speaker's identity? And then finally, for our purposes, what can we as language teachers, applied linguists, TESOL professionals do to change the attitudes of L1 listeners? And that's the question where I decided to jump in and see what I could cook up. Okay, back to the workshop. So for example, if I were doing this workshop, then I would show some language features of particular language backgrounds. So for example, here is Hmong language background. So I would look at the specifics. I don't know that I would say the word segmentals, but I would say vowels are not really much of a problem. There is true, there's not so much distinction between long and short vowels. So these pairs that you see here, the speaker would more likely say the word in green than the word in red, but that's not always such a serious problem. A bigger issue is consonants. So Hmong syllables do not end in consonants, never, except in a nasal sound like mm. So what does that mean? Now, you might see consonants when you see written Hmong, but that's because those letters are marking tones, because Hmong is a tonal language. So what that means is beginning and middle consonants may drop or change. So you could see these sorts of changes, right? So yeah. End consonants or clusters of consonants might drop or change. So you would see these kinds of changes. These sounds would be dropped or changed. What about beyond the individual sounds? Well, the rhythm influenced the rhythm of Hmong language. When people speak, every syllable gets equal emphasis because it is a language where most words are one syllable. So, and it is not a stress-timed language like English. What about stress and intonation? Hmong is a tonal language. Tones convey meaning. And every word, which is likely to be one syllable unless it's a loan word, every word will have one tone. That will be some version of high, low, rising, falling, or neutral. That means that the stress patterns of English, where in one word there are differences between syllables, that's not going to necessarily happen easily for the Hmong influenced speaker. So what that means is that rhythm and intonation and word and sentence stress may affect intelligibility. Not guaranteed to. Overall, speakers of Hmong may use L2 English that is different from what the L1 listener expects. And that's the issue, that it's all about expectation. It doesn't mean that it's going to be unintelligible. It's going to be different, but it's all about the expectations. Expectations about sounds, expectations about words, about grammar can affect intelligibility. Expectations that are not necessarily about sound can also affect intelligibility. And every interaction we have, whether we are the listener, the speaker, the L1, the L2, we approach with attitudes. Might be eagerness. I can't wait to hear what this person has to say. Might be anxiety. Will they understand me? Will I be understood? And it might be an attitude that is less helpful. And that takes me to the next question, which is, what non-linguistic factors have been shown to affect intelligibility? Sometimes language itself doesn't even play a role. So there have been experiments going back for, thanks, Megan. Yeah. There have been experiments going back to the 1980s and even before. Listeners perceive speech through a lens of social constructs about the speaker's identity, right? When we listen to speech, we match what we hear to our expectations. We also match what we see. And so some of these experiments have shown things like this. For example, in this 1992 experiment, listeners rated some recorded speech and they saw pictures of the speakers, but those pictures were faked. So for example, if they saw a picture of a white person giving a lecture, they said, oh, that accent is accessible. I can understand. When the picture was an Asian person, same pose, same clothing, same podium, listeners rated the speech as more accented, and they had difficulty completely answering questions about indicating that they comprehended it. All right, later researchers went one step further. They played recordings of a native speaker of English from Central Ohio. And this person then was shown, a picture was shown to represent this person. When you know where this is going, right? When the speaker was white, they heard little or no accent, and they had little difficulty in comprehension. When the speaker's picture was Asian, they heard an accent that wasn't there, including confusions of and ul. And they had difficulty answering comprehension questions. So they hallucinated an accent. It's what we can do as humans. And as two pronunciation experts said, no pronunciation instruction could possibly fix this problem, right? That's not where we should put our energy. We have to think about something else. I'm going to probably skip ahead a little bit. I think we all know what the judgments about accented speech do for non-native speakers. I mean, there are stigmatized accents and less stigmatized accents. Stigmatized accents, listeners will connect them with negative judgments about intelligence, competence, credibility, education, employability. We all know this. And we know what sorts of things happen to the speakers, because this is not a social taboo. It's widely accepted. Is it illegal? Well, Title VII in the Civil Rights Act says you can't discriminate on race or national origin. But if accent materially interferes with job performance, it's perfectly fine. And in a national survey, 10% of employers openly admitted to not hiring on the basis of accent. Here's where maybe I'll go a little faster. I see I want to get some time for us to talk. We know the consequences for non-native speakers. Those attitudes of irritation, ranging from irritation to frustration, disbelief, all the way to violence, those have really serious impacts. The impacts felt by speakers are hostile work environments, low quality housing, education, impacts on their finances, their career, immigration, legal status, self-esteem, health, well-being, and in the most drastic examples, loss of life. The next question for the workshop is, what can native speakers do? And there are several things. We can appreciate and share the dimensions of power in accent. Remember our initial definition, how different a pattern of speech sounds from the dominant local variety. Dominant is about power, and power, accent is about power. People who have power are considered to speak normally, who are considered to speak with an unaccented voice, whereas people without power are not. We can appreciate and share that accent is not the same as intelligibility and not the same as comprehensibility. We can appreciate and share that accent is a normal part of language teaching, yes, and language learning. We can appreciate and share that accent, the degree of accent, is not correlated with education, with intelligence, or motivation. We can also appreciate and share that most adult learners of another language are unlikely to achieve a native pronunciation. It can happen, but it's not the norm. We can also appreciate and share the amazing flexibility and speed that we have in understanding speech. We can understand vowels, which is amazing because that placement is almost limitless, the placement of the tongue, and yet we can understand. We can process what we hear within about 50 milliseconds, 5% of a second. We can process what we haven't heard yet. We can predict. Many listeners can predict a word 250 milliseconds, a quarter of a second after the first syllable. think how well this sets us up for a slightly harder task. But we can do that harder task. And that is, we can appreciate and share that we have an extraordinary capacity to adapt and learn. It's been shown that no overall difference in processing happens when we are processing native speaker speech or non-native speaker speech. Nothing different is happening. It's been shown that less than 1 minute of exposure to accented speech results in no slowdown then in answering comprehension questions. Less than 1 minute gets our brains primed. It's been showed that exposure to multiple speakers with a particular accent helps us adapt to another speaker we've never heard before from that same background. And it's been shown that this kind of exposure works on older listeners, like 65 and up, even with hearing impairment, even wearing hearing aids, and that their adaptation is comparable to younger listeners. Parts of this slide didn't load. Okay, reload. Okay. What we can also do, we can adapt. We can stretch our brains. We can listen and transcribe L2 speech of varieties that we are likely to encounter. And here is where YouTube is our friend. TED Talks and the site Green Card Voices. Now, it wasn't intended as an accent training site, but Green Card Voices is a Minnesota-run organization that shares the stories of new Americans, and it includes people who have Somali language backgrounds, Hmong language backgrounds, Spanish language backgrounds. Less than 1 minute can help us learn. We as native speakers can share fully in the task of communication. We can learn from multilinguals who are very good at cross-cultural communication. We can share their strategies. They do things like, well, while in conversation, they listen to the message. They listen to the message, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it is non-standard, they just listen and persist. They use the so-called let it pass strategy. They assume that what they're hearing now will become clearer or will become redundant as time passes in this conversation. They seek and give clarification gently. They spell out words or ask to spell out words. And they paraphrase patiently without displaying irritation as both a listener and a speaker. And all of these strategies are useful for native speakers to do. Okay, that's basically the fast version of this workshop. Let's talk about it. There was a slide that got skipped, but I think it's okay. Yeah. So what do you think about terminology? And I think Megan has a poll for us.
Yes, I will launch that poll right now.
Okay.
So everyone should see that on the screen. You will have to click on your choice and then click submit for it to be submitted.
Okay.
And if anybody has a question or needs clarification on the question, you could unmute or put it in the chat to ask. But we have about getting up to half of people have responded. And starting to slow down a little here at about 70% of participants responding.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Should we
Good.
end there or okay? Oh,
Yeah, I
up
think
to 75. All right. Enter your response. I'm gonna end the poll.
Yeah, if you have a feeling about this with these untrained audiences, should I? Yeah, okay, great. So I think, can everyone see the results then?
I should be able to. Yes.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so sounds like about a quarter of those who responded say push people, right? People are adaptable, people can learn, push them to use this phrasing that doesn't other, right? Because that whole notion of non-native speaker, I mean, do we say non-left-handed people, right? It's It is an issue. And there are people now who say, don't even use L2 users. We should use LX, because as we all know, lots of our students are learning English as their third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh language, right? Okay, so that's one issue, terminology, that I wanted to ask you about. Another one, audiences, you can imagine, maybe you can put things in the chat. Maybe, I mean, how many people do we have? Can we unmute and speak? I think so, right? Yeah, people say L2 is limiting. Okay. Reserve native to Indigenous people. That's great. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, native is a very odd word, especially I think in our state. Okay. I like I like home language. I do too. Yep. Okay. Audiences that you can imagine for this, beyond what I had said. Yeah. Yeah. People may not know what L1 or 2 is. I mean, of course, as part of the workshop, I would train them up on that, I think. Heritage language. Now, yeah, heritage language. Some people may say, oh, but yeah. Companies that employ large numbers. Yep. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another bit of feedback that I would really love is this: strategies that you teach L2 users to be better heard and better understood, and strategies you use to encourage confidence in their pronunciation, in their right to be listened to. Because I'm sure you, like me, you hear, oh, you understand me, but so-and-so didn't, this one didn't, that one didn't. You can understand me. So what do people say about that? And feel free to unmute and let's chat about this. Let's see if I can try to see people, see the names. Lots of repetition. Government agencies. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. Which syllables are stressed? Reading. Yeah, I think it's really good to share the functional load concept with students, right? I mean, in a kind of a translated way, but just say, these two sounds, they sound a lot alike, but everyone can understand you. Most everyone can. Would you spell it, please? Slow down. Yeah, that's an interesting issue. That slow down issue. I know many students who are extremely good speakers of English, and they want to speak really fast. And sometimes I've had individual one-on-ones with people and say, you know, you speak pretty fast. I don't want to speak slowly. I don't want to be a slow talker. Okay, I've been talking to other students because, yep, my speech is not the only one to understand. Yeah. Okay, great. The whole staff could use training. Oh, great. Yeah, interesting. Be gracious with yourself. Yeah. Yeah, Katie, that looks like a kind of kind paraphrasing, right? Paraphrase is when we reflect back to people. Did you mean this? I think I hear you say that. High level of comfort to native speakers. Good. Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, here's another question to ask you. The place of L2 users in this workshop. As I thought about this, I was chatting with a fellow Hamlin graduate student who is an L2 user himself. And I realized, many anti-bias trainings are run by white people, and particularly anti-racism trainings of a certain era, right? And they quote marginalized people. They hold them up, but they don't pay them and they don't involve them in leadership. And so my thought was, if somehow I am able, I would do this for free, but if somehow I am able to shop this somewhere, I would want to pay somebody else to either do it or do it with me. But I don't want to involve L2 users as exemplars of difficult speech or as sources of painful stories, right? So do I make this open source and just give it away? Do I help L2 users who are professionals and want to do this, or who are not professionals? Yeah, how do I make sure that this is not just white people talking? And I have 7 minutes of wait time, so please. Thanks, Kaya. Co-presenter. Yep. Oh, and model how to make mistakes, how to apologize. Yeah. L2 student who speaks very well. Yep. Yeah. Comment on their listening experiences of Americans. Aha. Yeah. L1 users are not always that intelligible. Right. And there's great research showing that. I actually have shared that with my students. Yeah. And what I mean is they're not that intelligible to one another, right? What about some of those strategies going back? Also think dominant language speakers giving their own examples of learning to listen could be useful. Yeah. I was telling somebody the other day about this, and this is a person who was a very lovely and justice loving person who said, I hallucinated an accent once. She said it was totally based on the person's name. And she said, it's so embarrassing to even tell you this, but I did. Oh, I like that. Yep. Celebrate multilingualism and point out how monolingualism is atypical, globally speaking. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, these strategies of multilinguals, I'm sure there are many, many, many more, but to me, they're so fascinating, and they come out of the research on English as a lingua franca or a global language, right? Because there are people together who have no common language other than English in work situations and training situations, and they are so gentle and gracious with one another. Guests and volunteers. Yep. In this class that I am lucky enough to teach on pronunciation, the question is, do we teach connected speech? I do a lot with connected speech. Yeah, not necessarily you must learn to produce this, but let's listen to this. Let's listen to this. And I bring in all kinds of realia from pop culture and media. Yeah. Interesting. At a conference, my higher level ESL students taught some words and phrases from their own languages. Yes. And this is really great. This is something that I know that Andrea Eckelberger does in her trainings. I've been part of that. She helps us do some perspective taking, right? So for example, in a class I was in, she came in and we had to learn some Khmer. And it was very eye-opening to feel, how does it feel? Yeah. Listening to a speaker with a picture. Yes, 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 yeah. In a long version of this, I would do several things. I would do some training. So I might do some of that matched guys. That's the research that tricks people by showing them a purported picture of the speaker. I might do that. It's a little cruel, right? Because then people feel crummy afterwards. But what I would like to do is do that 3 minutes, 5 minutes of exposure to a particular accent. And there have been all sorts of methods of doing this, right? Like you hear the accent, then you see the transcript, or you hear the accent and then you do some close exercises and then have a post, right? So I have a kind of pre and post just within the workshop. Yeah. Interesting. Can't keep up with my 25-year-old. Yes, there are generational ways of speaking and they don't always mesh well, right? Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been really neat. It is so weird not hearing you, but I guess that's how this goes. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Do you have one more slide, Sarah, or should we wrap it up?
I think that's it. I don't think I do. As I said, I lost a slide. I lost a slide, which was another one of these. What can native speakers do? Which is it's that perspective taking part of it. And I don't know why. I think I had a picture on there that it would not load, but it included something like learn and retell some of the stories of non-native speakers around accent. So for example, I wasn't looking for this, but the other day I heard Bee Nguyen, who is running for Secretary of State in Georgia, and she was talking about her parents, and her parents were heroes to her. They facilitated an escape from Vietnam. And she said, then I saw my mother get smaller and smaller and smaller. People would look past her or through her or not even look at her at all because of her accent. So those sorts of stories, collect them, keep them, share them. Share that story about the research on accent hallucination. It is real. It's been replicated like 7 times under different sorts of situations. We do it. We can do it. And you could say, oh, that's because we're so good at interpreting. We're so good at expecting. But maybe our expectations are not so good. Right? So do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah, for presenting and preparing this presentation, and to Penny for tech hosting, and for everyone for attending. We do at 3 o'clock, I think. Oh, no, sorry, 3:15. So in 15 minutes, if you're attending the annual Literacy Action Network meeting, that starts at 3:15. Otherwise, the last event of the day is 5:30 bingo. So and Sarah's materials, of course, will be available through the Sketch app. So thanks for joining, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.